If you're thinking of moving to Montana to start your own version of the Dutton Ranch, there's a few things we should talk about first. In this video, we're going to cover what you can expect when buying a rural property in Montana. So aside from the occasional Chinese spy balloon that may float overhead, I love living in the country. But if you're not familiar with rural living, there's a few things that might catch you off guard. If you hang out till the end of the video, I'll give you my best advice for dealing with some of the wildlife and pests that we frequently have here in Montana. Okay, so first let's talk about access. Now, this is a question you should be asking, but one that I don't get asked by a lot of people. They just assume that there's good year-round access, but a lot of properties here can even be seasonal access or four-wheel drive at the very least. I think access is probably one of the things I end up cautioning people from out of state about the most, because they're typically looking online, they haven't been to the area, they may not know that the area that looks close to town, it may be a much higher elevation and only seasonally accessed. Of course, sometimes it's not possible for you to actually visit the property, so you definitely need someone on the ground taking a look for you, sending you video, and letting you know what it looks like. I especially like looking at properties in the winter months just because you know probably the worst that you're going to get. So if you wait till after a big snow, go look at the properties you want to take a look at. That'll give you your best idea of what you can expect during the winter. Who maintains the road is really an important question to ask, and a lot of people will ask this, but I don't often have a really great answer for people because what happens sometimes in Montana is the HOA never forms. Like, nobody cares enough to form and have meetings and discuss the issues. It's more like, so-and-so down the road has a bobcat and he plows us out in the winter and we all put some cash in his mailbox. That was literally the answer that I had for a client one time. Another thing you want to think about is being off-grid. A lot of people like this idea and they really think that an off-grid cabin in Montana is going to be great. And it is, but the biggest thing I caution people there is with resale value. You really want to make sure that you can sell it again at the end. Usually banks don't like to finance these properties with really great terms because they're not a great investment for the bank. So typically you're going to have like 25% down, maybe 30% down, and a poor interest rate. So you're really looking for cash buyers for those properties, which just narrows your pool of buyers by quite a lot. It doesn't mean that you can't sell it. It doesn't mean it's not a good idea for you. But it's just something to consider when you're thinking about buying it, and you want to consider how long you might be keeping it. So one of the other things that you're going to deal with if you live outside of the city limits is having your own septic tank and maintaining it. I had one client who refused to even look at properties or purchase a property that had its own septic system. I thought that was a little strange because in my mind, everything just flows downhill to a tank, whether it's your tank or the city's tank. It doesn't make much difference as long as it's maintained. It's usually not a big deal. You just have your tank pumped every couple of years, depending on the size of your family and the size of your system. And you can find out those things from your septic permit. That will give you a rough sketch of where on the property the septic field is located. And it will also give you the size of the tank. And you can also check with whoever you have service the tank and see how often they're going to recommend that you have it pumped out. Typically, 2 to 4 years for a normal household. Another good idea for septic systems is to keep all of your receipts. So this will come into play if you're purchasing a property. You hope that the previous owner kept receipts so you know the last time that the tank was serviced and who they used. And if you are looking at selling your property in the future, if you have good records of your maintenance, it'll just make it that much easier when you have a buyer looking at the property. You'll be able to prove how often you had it serviced and what it typically took to maintain it. So a good idea if you're purchasing a property with a septic system is to ask the previous owner to either provide your receipt with maintenance within the last year or to have it pumped before they move out. That way you know you're going into a system that looks good. It also gets eyes on the system if there's any big issues. Hopefully that will come to light during your inspection period and you can deal with the seller on those issues. So just keep in mind it costs about $400 to $500 to have the tank pumped, but it's a lot cheaper than $5,000 if something goes wrong with your tank. So keeping up on your maintenance is key here. So another thing to keep in mind when you're purchasing a rural property is that you'll probably have to deal with your own trash. A lot of places don't have a trash service that will come and pick up your garbage can on a weekly basis. Those are going to be in town. Sometimes cities have those set up. Larger areas like Bozeman and Belgrade, they're going to have independent companies that you can hire to come collect your trash, even in surrounding areas pretty far outside of town. But when you get into a little bit more rural area like Livingston, you're probably going to have to haul your own trash to some centralized bins that will then be emptied on a regular basis. And here in Park County, we just get a little tag that you hang on your rearview mirror, and it lets people know that you're in the county and you own a property and you can dump your trash at those bins. Okay, so the next thing you're going to deal with if you're buying a rural property is water. You're going to need to know what kind of water system your property has. Typically, it's just going to have a well, but it's an important question to ask and not assume, because there are some areas in Montana where wells are just too deep to make them practical, and you'll end up with something like a cistern to haul or to store water, and you'll have to call somebody in to fill that frequently. So it's a question to ask, even if you're in town and you think your system is good. I did hear of a story where a person bought a property. It had a well on it. There was nothing indicated on the disclosures that there was a problem with the well, and come to find out in the winter, the well always ran dry, and that was not disclosed to the new buyers. That's a huge, huge red flag. Always disclose something like that we don't get sued later. But they ended up having to drill another well or re-drill that one. I'm not sure exactly what happened there. Another thing with wells is you should be able to come up with a well log, unless it's an extremely old well. The well log will tell how deep the well is, how many gallons a minute you can expect to get out of it, its recovery time, and that type of thing. And they're typically registered, and you do need a water right to go along with that well for residential use. A lot of people tell me that you don't have to have a water right. I've talked to the DNRC many times about this. You do need to file a water right if you drill a new well, even if it's for residential purposes. They're probably not going to tell you no, but you still need to go ahead and register the well. If you're looking at developing raw land and having to drill a well, it's really important to do your due diligence here. Call a well driller that is local and ask those questions. How deep might the well be in this area? What kind of ground are you drilling through? Because there can be different methods that they need to use, and it can really vary on the cost depending on how far down they have to go and what type of ground they're going through. I think the deepest well log I ran across was in Gallatin County. It was 1,200 feet deep, and most well quotes that I've gotten recently are about $75 a foot. And that doesn't include your pump system or your tank or anything like that. So, something to research. Ask about wells in the area. There's a website that you can get on, and I'll link it in the description, that you can check out well depths in the area, or just call a local driller, and they should be able to give you a pretty good idea of what to expect. Another issue is well maintenance. A lot of people don't test their well after they initially move in. Some don't even test when they do move in. I usually recommend it just because you can find all kinds of different things in the well water that you weren't aware of, especially around an agricultural area. You might find something like arsenic from fertilizer, that kind of thing. There might be bacteria in the well if the well head is not secured well or has a crack in it or is damaged in some way. It may be letting in bacteria that could grow and harm you. So having a professional test your well is your best bet. Some loan programs insist on a third party testing the well, so you can't really do it yourself or ask the seller to do it. It's better to have a professional go and do that. That way you can submit that. BA loans and FHA loans typically want the well to be tested before they'll go ahead and loan money on that property. And sometimes it takes a while to get those tests back, so if you can do it early on in the inspection period, usually takes about a week to get the test results back. So just be thinking ahead on that aspect. And you should realistically be testing your well every year just to see how it's doing. I'm guilty. We tested when we moved in, and we've been here for a couple of years, and I know a lot of people don't do this, but it's good practice. I think tests typically run you about $50, and there's a place in Four Corners that will do it for you. You just bring them a sample, and they can run that for you real quick and make sure your water's good. Okay, so the next thing we'll talk about is cell service and internet service. So there's still big sections of Montana that don't have good cell service, and it's just worth a question ask about internet services in the area. If it's very rural, you know, you're not going to have a cable option or anything like that. You may end up with satellite. But then, of course, closer to larger cities, you're going to get your high-speed cable and fiber optic wires and all that kind of stuff. The other thing that we have now in Montana, and I looked on the map and it says it's available in most of Montana, is Starlink. So that could be an option. It's a little bit more expensive, but I know some clients who have it and they really love it. There's a setup fee. I think it was $599 for the first setup fee, and then it's like $100 a month for your internet. So that's an option if you're extremely rural and you need good internet service. Okay, another issue that you're probably going to deal with if you buy a rural property with any acreage is noxious weeds, or should I say you should be dealing with. A lot of people don't care and just let the weeds take over, which is fine for you on your property, but the seeds are going to blow downwind, and if your neighbors are fighting with them and trying to, you know, bring back native grasses or have livestock that they need to feed, the noxious weeds are not good forage, so they're going to want to keep some really good grasses growing there, and if you're constantly seeding their fields with weed seeds, it might not be the best situation. So it's really a good idea to just do your best to keep the weeds at a minimum on your own property, and then if everybody pitches in, takes care of their own property, you know, we can all do the best we can and combat the weeds. We do have some weeds here that kind of make the ground around them toxic to other grasses, and they will absolutely take over and make the ground just dead and hard to bring back, and you'll end up spraying more chemicals later on trying to beat them rather than just like spot spraying or pulling them on a yearly basis. Just go for a walk, take a hoe with you, take some gloves, and just make sure you're keeping up on your weeds. Probably the best resource for you there is the county extension office. They usually have a dedicated person that handles all the resources for taking care of noxious weeds in Montana. So they're usually more than happy to help. If you're willing to work with them, they're happy to help give you resources and point you in the right direction. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the pests that you may encounter, and as promised, I will give you my solutions for them. So living out in the country, pests and wildlife are going to be a constant. You're going to deal with them. Some of the things that you're going to deal with are deer. Almost everywhere in Montana, you're going to have a lot of deer if you live out in the country. This is especially annoying for me because I try to grow things. So to combat the deer, I fence anything that I want to grow. The yard is fine, it grows just fine and they mow it down, it's not a big deal. But if you want to grow a garden, if you want to plant little baby trees, berry bushes, anything like that, you're going to want to fence around them, and deer jump pretty high, so I would say probably at least a 5 or 6 foot fence. We do have a lot of rabbits and gophers. Gophers are probably one of the biggest things, and it's actually really funny. I lived in Florida for a couple of years, and I happened to be at a pet store, and I saw a gopher running on a wheel like a hamster, and they had it labeled a Richardson ground squirrel, and they were charging $200 for this pet. And like, I called my mom back home, and I was like, hey, I got a killer business idea. You ship me a bunch of gophers, and we'll make a killing here. My solution here, I learned from my mom, is a nice pellet gun. I also have a killer cat that is awesome at his job. He not only catches mice, gophers, he's caught full-grown rabbits, and he even brought me a weasel the other day. I think it was a baby weasel. I don't know. So, cat or pellet gun. Okay, so grasshoppers are another common pest that we have here, and they're not really a big issue for me because I have discovered that my chickens love them and turn them into fresh eggs for us. So we really didn't have much problem with grasshoppers last year when everybody else was complaining about how many there were out. I was like, there's none in my yard. I think chickens even keep snakes away a little bit too. I haven't seen very many snakes around my property, and we're kind of out on the flat, dry area, so I would expect them to be. But I've only seen a couple of little garter snakes around the house, and I know the chickens would go after them if they saw it, so I think chickens are a good solution for me. We do have diamondback rattlesnakes in Montana, so if you're out hiking, it's a good idea to keep an eye out for them. Make sure you're just checking ahead of you, and a lot of times they'll have signs posted on trails that are notorious for having a lot of them, but if it's not posted, you can expect it dry, rocky areas near water is kind of where they like to hang out. So just keep your eyes open there. And I've lived in Montana almost my entire life, and I've only run into a couple, I think. So not very frequently. Maybe I just don't get out much, but it's not a huge deal unless you're out hiking a lot. Another thing you want to watch out for is ticks. We do have ticks here. Typically, they are most active in the spring and summer, so you're going to want to just watch your dogs, your pets. I know some people that just duct tape their pant legs to their boots so that nothing crawls up while they're out hiking. That could be an option. And then just checking yourself after you've been out in the woods or out camping or hiking. Make sure you don't bring any creepy crawlies home. So hopefully that was helpful for you. If you have other questions about purchasing a rural property in Montana, please feel free to give me a call, shoot me a text, send me an email, or schedule a virtual meeting. All that information will be in the description. And if you're curious about utility costs in Montana, you should check out my next video.